History usually celebrates the armies that advanced, the ones that conquered cities, the ones that expanded empires, the ones that marched forward and never looked back. But sometimes, the greatest stories are not about advancing. They are about refusing to step back. Because there are moments in history when retreat is not just defeat, it is destruction. And on those days, survival depends on one simple decision: stand or lose everything. This is the story of the army that refused to retreat. The morning was cold and quiet. A thin mist covered the valley floor, softening the shapes of hills and trees. For a brief moment, the land looked peaceful, almost untouched by war. But that peace didn't last long. From the horizon, dust began to rise. Then came the sound, low at first, a distant rumble, boots, armor, drums. An army was approaching, not a small one, not a manageable one, but a force so large it looked like the earth itself was moving. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers filled the valley, banners waving like dark waves in the wind. Sunlight flashed off steel helmets and spear tips. The sound of marching echoed against the cliffs like thunder. It was overwhelming. Anyone looking at that sight would have known the truth instantly. Nothing could stop that army, nothing, except one small line of defenders standing directly in its path. They weren't many, a few thousand at most, tired, hungry, some wounded from previous battles, their armor scratched and dented, their shields worn from years of fighting. These weren't fresh recruits marching toward glory. These were survivors, and they knew exactly what stood behind them. Their villages, their families, their homes. If they stepped back even once, the road would open, and everything behind them would burn. So retreat was never an option. Not because they were fearless, but because they had nowhere left to go. Their commander walked slowly along the line, saying nothing. He didn't need speeches. Every soldier already understood. This wasn't a battle to win. It was a stand to survive. Orders spread quietly, shields locked together, spears angled forward, rows tightened. Each man's shoulder pressed against the next. No gaps, no panic, no running, just discipline. Because discipline was the only thing stronger than fear. The enemy army began moving faster. Drums pounded harder. War cries rose into the air. From a distance, it looked like a storm racing toward them, a wall of steel and dust that could crush anything in its way. The defenders didn't move. They didn't shout. They didn't charge. They simply waited, hearts pounding, breathing steady, trusting the formation. Then came the impact. The charge slammed into them with terrifying force. Steel hit shields, wood cracked, the ground shook. For a moment it felt like the world itself might split apart. But the line held. Feet dug into dirt. Arms locked tight. No one stepped back. Not one. The enemy expected collapse. Instead, they hit a wall. Behind the front ranks, more attackers kept pushing forward, unaware that the charge had stopped. Their own numbers crushed them together. Soldiers couldn't swing swords properly, couldn't move freely. Their strength became a weakness. Too many bodies, too little space. Chaos spread fast, shouting, confusion, orders lost in noise. Meanwhile, the defenders stayed calm. When one soldier tired, another replaced him. When one shield cracked, another slid into place. Every movement controlled, every step planned. They fought like one single body, not thousands of individuals. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. The enemy attacked again and again, each time louder, each time weaker. They pushed harder but gained nothing. Sweat replaced confidence. Breathing grew heavy, arms slowed. The defenders, rotating positions and conserving energy, remained steady. They weren't stronger. They were simply disciplined, and discipline lasts longer than rage. Slowly, something changed. The noise faded. The shouting weakened. For the first time, hesitation appeared. Enemy soldiers began glancing behind them. Some slowed their attacks. Others stepped back. Doubt had arrived, and doubt destroys armies faster than swords ever could. The defenders sensed it. But they didn't break formation, didn't chase recklessly, didn't celebrate too soon. They simply stood, because standing had protected them all day. Standing would finish it. Then, almost unbelievably, the massive army began to retreat, not in panic, but in confusion, step by step, wave by wave, pulling away from a line they simply could not break. The unstoppable force, stopping. The defenders stayed where they were, watching, breathing, alive. When the last banners disappeared beyond the hills, silence returned to the valley. The small army still stood, exhausted, bruised, but unbroken. They hadn't conquered anything. They hadn't chased glory. They hadn't destroyed their enemy. They had done something far rarer. They had refused to retreat. And sometimes, that is the greatest victory of all. News of the stand spread far and wide, not because of how many enemies they defeated, but because of something far more powerful. They held, they endured, they protected what mattered, and long after the empires faded and the armies vanished, people still remembered that day, not the charge, not the numbers, but the line that never stepped back, the army that refused to retreat, the ones that conquered cities, crossed borders, and planted their flags on foreign soil, the ones that marched forward with confidence and returned with victory. These are the stories carved into monuments and written into books. But sometimes the greatest victories don't come from moving forward. Sometimes they come from refusing to step back. Because there are moments in history when retreat is not simply defeat, it is destruction. And on those days, survival depends on one decision alone: stand or lose everything. The morning air was cold and heavy with mist. The valley lay silent, wrapped in pale light. For a few quiet minutes, nothing moved except the wind sliding between the rocks. It looked peaceful, harmless. But everyone standing there knew the truth. This place would soon be covered in noise, steel, and blood, because this narrow valley was the only road south, and a small army stood directly across it. They weren't impressive to look at. Their armor was scratched and dented. Their shields were worn and repaired more than once. Many hadn't eaten properly in days. Some carried fresh bandages from battles already fought. These weren't heroes chasing glory. They were tired men with one simple task: hold the line. Behind them were their villages, their farms, their families sleeping in homes that had never seen war. If the enemy passed through this valley, there would be nothing left to protect. So retreat was never an option, not because they were fearless, but because they had nowhere left to go. Then came the sound, low at first, a distant vibration in the ground, then louder, boots, drums, armor clashing together. The mist began to shake, and over the hills the enemy appeared. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers poured into the valley like a moving sea of iron. Banners waved high above their heads. Spears flashed in the sunlight. Their formation stretched farther than the eye could follow. It didn't look like an army. It looked like an avalanche. Anyone watching would have known the outcome immediately. A small force against something that large? Impossible. Even some defenders quietly accepted they might not survive the day, but they still didn't move. Their commander walked slowly along the line, saying nothing. He didn't need speeches. Every soldier already understood what was at stake. This wasn't about winning. This wasn't about glory. This was about time. Every minute they held meant another minute their families stayed safe. Orders spread quietly down the ranks. Shields locked. Shoulders touched, spears lowered, rows tightened. Each man became part of something larger than himself. A wall, because a wall does not retreat. The enemy began to advance, first marching, then jogging, then charging. War cries shattered the morning silence. Drums pounded like thunder. Dust rose into the sky as thousands rushed forward at once. It looked unstoppable, like a storm racing toward a fragile fence. Most armies would have broken at that sight. But this one didn't. They stood still, breathing steady, eyes forward, trusting each other more than their fear. Then the impact came. Steel slammed into shields with a deafening crash. The ground trembled beneath their boots. For a moment it felt like the line might shatter, but it didn't. Feet dug into dirt, arms locked tight. Not one step back. The charge stopped dead. Behind the front ranks, more attackers kept pushing forward, unaware that the line had stalled. They crushed their own soldiers together, weapons tangled. Movement became impossible. Their greatest strength had betrayed them. Too many men, too little space. Chaos spread instantly. Officers shouted conflicting orders. Soldiers collided with one another. Some couldn't even lift their weapons properly. Meanwhile, the defenders remained calm. When one man tired, another replaced him. When one shield cracked, another slid into place. Every motion controlled, every action precise. They didn't fight harder. They fought smarter. Hours passed. The sun climbed high overhead. The enemy attacked again and again, each time louder, each time weaker. Sweat replaced confidence. Arms grew heavy. Breathing became desperate. Frustration turned into anger, and anger turned into mistakes. But the wall never moved. The defenders conserved energy, rotated positions, rested when they could. They understood something the enemy didn't. Battles aren't won by who hits the hardest. They're won by who lasts the longest. Slowly something changed. The shouting faded. The charges slowed. Hesitation appeared. Enemy soldiers began glancing backward. Doubt crept into their minds, and doubt spreads faster than fear, because once an army stops believing it can win, it already hasn't. Then it happened. One group stepped back, then another. Then entire ranks began pulling away. The unstoppable force, retreating. The defenders didn't chase, didn't celebrate, didn't break formation. Discipline had saved them all day. Discipline would protect them now. They simply stood and watched the massive army withdraw down the valley. When silence finally returned, the small force was still there, exhausted, bruised, barely able to stand, but alive. They hadn't conquered land. They hadn't destroyed their enemy. They had done something far rarer. They had refused to retreat. And sometimes that is the greatest victory of all. Long after the battle, people didn't remember the size of the enemy army. They remembered something else, the line that didn't break, the shields that never fell, the soldiers who chose to stand when logic said run, because courage is inspiring. But discipline is legendary. And that is why history still whispers about that day. The day an army faced impossible odds and refused to take a single step back.